When I talk about drawing nature, this is the beautiful sort of nature I'm talking about. It's a bit of Australian bushland near where I live. Would you think of this as a possible subject for you to draw? Freehand, in ink, no pencil, no erasing. I believe the reason we find this sort of subject so hard to draw is because we think about drawing it the wrong way, because we think about drawing generally as outlining various shapes and objects and then perhaps adding lights or darks or colours even to the outlines. But here in nature, the shapes, the objects are overwhelmingly numerous and complex. How can I possibly outline all that I see here? But I believe one simple change in my drawing has made it wonderfully possible for me to draw scenes like this, scenes that I used to just think would never be in my sketchbook. And here we are, coming up to our drawing scene now. So I'm going to demo this scene just behind me from a photo that I took yesterday of this same spot. The drawing took me a bit under an hour to draw in real time, so this demo is sped up to 3 times my actual drawing speed. This video is about a simple change in the way we understand drawing that changes how we draw, which makes drawing scenes such as this possible. It's simple. Simple isn't necessarily the same as easy, but equally, with some really focused practice, it's actually not difficult to understand, to grasp this change more fully and to develop it firstly in the way we think, then in the way we observe, and then in the way we put the ink on the paper. And at the end, I'll add a little more of the video clip walking along this track to reach, I think, a really lovely place that might well be my reference for a drawing video tomorrow. So at the very start, I'm not looking for shapes or objects. And I'm doing my best not to use lines, because lines will block effects that I can create by more varied marks later. There is nothing worse than lines put in the initial stages of a drawing that compromise our ability to create what we want further down the track. Effects that we hadn't quite worked out at the start, because we can't finish any part of our drawing until the end, which is why it's really important, I think, if you want to understand what I'm saying, that you watch this demo till the end. Because some of the effects won't be created and can't be created until the final moments of putting ink on the paper. This is to do with how we think. We have to change the way we think, the way we expect a drawing to come into being. I'm working on the whole drawing all at once for the whole drawing session, which, as I said in this case, was just under an hour. And so I can't finish any one piece because I can't know how to create the effect that will work, that will create the picture that I want until I work all the things around it together. So I am using lines for the very few parts of this where I can confidently put lines, which is where we have branches and fairly thin branches that have nothing passing in front of them. Some of these branches in the upper half of the drawing. But notice for the tree trunks, particularly the tree on the left, I didn't draw straight lines down. I did some dashes really, because I need to bring some visual effects in front of that branch, in front of that trunk. And again, look at this tree on the upper left that I've just drawn, because I'm going to have foliage that's going to come across in front of that trunk. Knowing exactly what sort of dashes and dots to use is something that we become more comfortable with and perhaps more accurate in predicting the more we draw this sort of scene. Remember, this isn't the first bushland scene I've drawn. So I'm avoiding using long continuous lines, which in themselves often create a cartoon-like effect and will cause us to start to draw shapes and objects rather than trying to see the effects and then draw them. So the effects, they come from things like different surface textures. So bark, so the stipple on sandstone rocks little dirt and leaf litter and so forth. The effect comes from the silhouette edges that we see. It comes from distance, from how close something is to how far something else is from us, even if it's the same subject, same object. It comes from values, from the lights and darks, and how they fit together and create a pattern of moving from light to dark, quite independent of whether they're the same or different objects, whether the objects are close together or further away. The effect comes from colour, which obviously is the one effect I can't use in this drawing because I'm drawing with a pen, but I can adapt my visualization of value and my understanding of the value and mold that to create some of the effect that in life or in the reference colour is creating. So as I said, please watch till the end, because particularly the values are things that can't be finalised until the end. And it's often in the last 2 or 3 or 4 minutes that the most significant marks are put on the paper that really snap the scene into a sense of 3 dimensions, that really make some things clear and keep other things looking more in the background, less clear, more as support act. In a scene such as this, we need to choose what we want to do. Now, the biggest challenge for creating effect, in my mind, is this plant on the left-hand side that comes across. These large spiky plants are very common. They start off looking like tufts of grass, but then they end up looking like little palm trees as they grow upwards over the years. They're all over the place near where I live and up and down the eastern seaboard of Australia. And if you look closely at the photo, it's very tempting just to try and draw lots of straight lines that come out to represent these very thin, very spiky, quite hard leaves. But visually, because they're all together, it's not so much any one, but it's the effect of them bunched together, and the way bunched together, they're capturing shadows, creating shadows, as well as the way visually they interrupt the lines, the appearance of things that they go in front of, such as this tree on the left. And therefore they also interrupt the consistency of things such as not just the outline, but also the shadows down that tree. And if you look, you can see now how I've drawn some of those long, spiky leaves in front of the tree, because when I come down and add the value to that tree, I've got to leave some gaps to create the effect of I think of it as a visual disturbance of when we have fine foliage that's almost too fine to draw, but it sits in front of something and it interrupts our clear view of the thing behind. So what I want to capture is not so much what that fine foliage looks like, but I want to capture the visual interruption that's happening from it. Does that make sense? I hope it does, because it's a very, very significant way of thinking, of understanding when we're trying to see effects and not see shapes. Now, with these trunks, the hatching is also a way we can create effect. It's a way we can not just create value, lights or darks, and in this case, it's not just shadow that I'm using the hatching for, but these larger trees are showing evidence of a bushfire in their past, or possibly just some backburning, some fire, controlled fire burning to reduce the fire load on the ground for a summer in the past. But it's certainly not recent, because there is a lot of reasonably old green growth. So there's not just shadow on the bark, but there's still burnt bark that's there. And then there's a combination of in parts shadow on the burnt bark. So I'm trying to just play with the effects of light and dark. You'll also notice that I didn't do straight continuous lines for the silhouette of the tree trunk, because for most trees, most Australian trees certainly, that doesn't actually represent life. There is a texture in the bark surface, and when we see the edge with light behind it, we can see the slight irregularities that the texture of the bark creates. So I need to capture that effect And I don't try and copy exactly what's in the photo. I try and appreciate the effect that I'm seeing and then to replicate that in my drawing. Now here you can see me doing the shadow, in this case, down this tree, and see the gaps I've left now to indicate the visual interruption that we have, the distortion of being able to see this tree trunk. And if I just drawn the lines in front of this tree at the end, because I'm drawing the shapes of the leaves on top of the tree I've already drawn the outline of behind, it really wouldn't have read nearly as effectively. Now, you can't really judge this right now. You'll need to wait till the end, because I've still got to do the ink on the paper for the rocks behind and the trees and the shrubs behind this spiky plant. It's not just the tree trunk, but the tree trunk is the main one, and it's going to be the strongest contrast. So the darkest value with the whitest whites. And so I want to establish that in some fairly strong way first, because although I don't want to get the final darkness done at this point, because I don't know for sure how dark I want that to be so that it doesn't stand out too much, I can be confident because it is clearly one of the darkest areas of this. There's this left-hand tree, there's the lower part of the right-hand tree, and there is some shade and some shadows on the rocks in the lower section. These are the darkest values in the photo, and I want them therefore to be the darkest values in my drawing. There's that foliage in the upper left as well, which is quite dark. Now you'll notice that for the foliage of these further back trees, basically all the foliage of all the trees, I'm not trying to draw a single leaf, not even for the relatively close trees. Instead, I'm trying to create the effect, the feel of the colour, the value of the colour, and the distance away it is. Now, one thing I often do for distance, to strengthen an effect of distance, is when things go further away, I use a finer pen. Now, I'm already using a 0.1 for this, and I decided that for this demo and just for my own challenge, I would actually just keep using the same pen and try and vary the effect of how the marks look on the paper by lightening some of them, by trying to hold the pen lightly and doing very quick marks. So the direction of my marks is also important, because with so much detail, when I'm trying to create the effect of detail, I've still got to find marks that create distinction between things that I'm drawing in a very similar way. So a lot of things are coming into, I hope, focus through my hatching, and most of the hatching is, you'd have to say, predominantly in a vertical direction. Therefore, I do want to try and, where possible, have hatching that's contrast into that, not just contrast in the value it creates, the number of lines, how close together they are, but also by the direction. And the tree trunks of these closest trees are the most obvious example of that. I like doing horizontal lines that are basically perpendicular to the sides of the branch or the trunks, because it gives clarity, and I can also draw them with a certain roundedness that helps create the effect of the three-dimensional form. See, another problem with thinking of outlining shapes is that although we see shapes when we look at something, in reality the objects are forms. They are three dimensions. We can walk around them. And that does create the perspective of that creates a certain pattern that's subtle, but we at least intuitively recognize it when we see something. So I want to use these hatching lines for the tree trunks to echo not just the circular shape, the cylindrical shape rather, of the trunks and the branches, but also that when we're looking down, they will curve in elliptical direction, lower down, and when I look up, they'll curve elliptically in the other direction. That's employing the perspective principles to a natural object. Perspective is happening everywhere, every time we look at anything at all. The level of our eyes does change what we see. It's just that it's more obvious with geometric shapes, such as buildings, or shapes non-geometric shapes such as people that we're so familiar with that we, again, intuitively can tell if they're right or not. So now I've moved to the foreground before I do too much for the background, before I finalize my background and finalize my values on the main subjects on these trees. So the depth of plane in this scene isn't actually as far as in many bush scenes that I've drawn. The furthest trees in this are still relatively close because this is actually a path with a creek down off to the right that curves around. And so what we see in the distance is not disappearing in the horizon, but it's actually this little gorge curving around to the left as I walk along it. So now I'm trying to find marks to create the rocks, and because we're not drawing straight lines for edges, not unless a straight line actually is the best way to capture the effect of the edge, rocks are something we need to slow down for. Often we create the feel of the rock, of the effect of the rock in that position with that lighting by not drawing any edge or the very faintest guide for an edge, and instead coming down with the hatching behind it. Much like what you see with this rock in the lower right and the foliage that's behind it. At some stage, I'm pretty sure I'm still going to darken to strengthen the value of that. So it's not a heavy line that we see, but the light on the rock simply disappears as the rock curves away from view. That contrasts strongly with the value of the foliage behind it that's in shade. So in other words, I'm trying to replicate the effect of what I'm seeing in life. So there is no way to draw anything. It's always what's the effect in these circumstances of all of these tiny things massed together from the distance I'm seeing them from, because it will be very different if I'm seeing certain plants from close up than if they're way in the distance. And also with the light and so forth, the way the light is casting shadow and shade and these things. Please hit the like button if you haven't already. I would love you to leave me a comment at the end that tells me, do you think there's something in this that you can actually use to perhaps change the way you think and make you enthusiastic about drawing scenes such as this, or perhaps nature scenes in whatever part of the world you live in that you've always wanted to draw but felt you could never do justice or got overwhelmed in the detail. I would love to hear if you're encouraged to give it a go, but with this different way of thinking. And as I said, if this has been helpful for you, please help me out, help my channel out, hit the like button. And if you have a friend who draws, please share this with them. And my videos from about the last 3 or 4 videos on are now auto-dubbed. So if you've got friends who speak any of the 8 languages, maybe you live in Germany and you speak English, well, German is one of the 8 languages. I think it's French, German, Spanish, Portuguese, Japanese, Hindi, Indonesian, and Italian, I think, are the languages that you can now hear this in those languages, this voiceover being automatically translated. And I did check out all the languages, and the voice isn't too bad. It's not really my voice, but it's not far from it, I wouldn't say. So now I'm doing the more final marks. I'm pausing, looking at the overall effect. I can't lighten things that I think I wish that was lighter, but I can darken the effect of things around that. And that has the effect of making the bits I haven't darkened feel lighter. So this is why it's back and forth, back and forth. It's also, though, why we want to not put too many marks too quickly in too many places, because we may not realize how light we want something to be early on in the process. And that, I think, brings us pretty much to the end. Really enjoyed doing this drawing. I hope you've enjoyed this demo. And if you want to have a go, of course, you'll find this photo on my channel community page, or post page as they call it now. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. It's actually a much sunnier, lovelier day than a couple of days ago when I was down here taking the reference photos. But we'll just walk past this tree that featured in the centre, and I'll just show you a bit further along. This really is just such a beautiful part of the world, particularly on a gloriously sunny day. There's a creek to my right that this track follows along before it climbs up higher up on the ridge line. But here we have some great steps, really interesting stone effects I thought we might draw and focus on. I love these sorts of scenes. I'll probably do a few more videos with these sorts of subjects because I am pretty excited about continuing to develop my skill in observing effects and then finding marks to create those effects that overall create the effect of that bushland setting. So please have a go yourself, why not? But in the end, whatever you choose to draw, however you choose to draw it, make sure you have fun. And I'll see you next time. Bye.